All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Sheikh Abdullah and Cultural Center. Thank you again for coming. And I'd like to welcome everybody who's joining us on YouTube today. Thank you for joining us. So I'm Dalia Hussein. I'm from the Education Department, and we're glad to be hosting Tarek Shumari, our guest speaker today. Tarek has received his bachelor's degree from University Colorado Boulder in molecular cellular developmental biology, and he's also gotten his master's in neuroscience from University College London. Today he is talking to us about bathing in red light, but a little bit of background and his accomplishments and ask. He started the Biology Journal Club, and it's a virtual discussion focusing on recent biology papers and articles. It's also created to cultivate interest in the sciences. Topics that he's mentioned or he's introduced to us before range from ketogenic diet to the neuroscience of illusion. So I'd like to welcome him today, and again, he will be giving us a little bit about bathing in red light. Thank you, and
take it away.
Take it away.
Well, guys, I guess I'm not like a health influencer or anything like that. Maybe a little bit. Who knows? Who am I to label myself? Anyway, but I asked some of you in the beginning if you knew anything about red light therapy. If anyone's ever seen it in the clinic, or I know someone in the audience works at a dermatology clinic. Is that right? Do they use red light therapy in the dermatology clinic? I think they do. They do. Right? That's becoming a new thing. So we'll be talking about that. I'll be talking a little bit about the biology underlying that. It's not just focus. It's not just something that is in pop science. There is actual science behind it, and we'll go over some of the detailed molecular biology of it. I hope you guys can bear with me when I get to that. It's going to be hard. Well, I don't know, hard, but like it'll be overwhelming. At least the visual. There's a visual, and then it'll be a little bit overwhelming. I'll give you a warning. So if any of you have trigger warnings about hard science, there it is. Okay, so today, biohacking, bathing in red light. All right, but first, let me just give you guys a disclaimer. This presentation does not contain medical advice. Everything in this is for educational purposes only. And I am not a professor, but if I was, I would be professing things, not giving you medical science stuff. Anyway, this is just educational content. Please take it at face value, and please do your research for yourself, okay? All right, so, and with that, also, I'll go over what we're gonna learn today. So today, we're gonna learn about what PBM is. I'm gonna be saying PBM. It means photo, light, bio, your biology, modulation, or change, right? So something with your biology, light changes, okay? PBM. And then we're going to be going over how light affects our biology so profoundly. As I said, the molecular mechanism underlying light, right? The applications of it, clinical and even non-clinical towards the end. Mostly though, we're covering clinical stuff, and how a lot of biohackers in Silicon Valley that want to improve their workday will actually take these big LED panels full of red light, just stick it next to their office desk, and that's what they're doing. So that, and then the last question, can I do this at home? And yes, you can. But like with everything, it's for a price. You're not gonna be happy with the price, but it's getting cheap. All right, so the next thing before we continue is, if you have any questions, please go to sli.do and enter this code. This is the event number right here, 87243 or 872423. And by there, at Slido, you can submit your questions, okay? And we'll save it for the end. All right, first, when you guys do that, I'll give you guys a couple seconds to do that. All right, so a little bit of context. Let me ask you guys a question. What range of light can the human eye perceive? Does anyone know? Off the top of their head. Everyone knows this. Okay, I mean, we can see red light, we can see blue light. What about microwaves? Can we see microwaves? That's a form of light, though, right? What about gamma rays? Can you see gamma rays? Infrared? UV, yeah, kind of sucks that we don't, but anyway, where humans are very limited in their perception of the universe, or in their perception of the world. I think honeybees and some other bugs can see UV, and I think infrared as well. But basically, because of the structure of our eyes, we can only see a very narrow band. But guess what? That's all we really need, right? We're here, we're alive, we're doing well. You guys found yourselves in this theater, thanks to your eyes, and thanks to that narrow band of light. So, why am I telling you about the narrow band of light that we can see? Because we're here to talk about red light. And specifically, we'll get into the details of what band of red light I'm talking. Why is this a butterfly? This is not a butterfly. This is not a smiley face. There, okay. We'll get into the actual specifics of the red light that we see. And then also something called near infrared light that is included in a lot of the medical devices and the panels that I'll be showcasing, not showcasing, I'm not a salesman, but showing you. And those invisible LEDs actually do emit light that is therapeutic to us anyway, and they usually mix them, and we'll go over that later. So just to get your head around light. So what is photobiomodulation? Biggest word of today. So according to the American Society for Laser Medicine and Surgery, photobiomodulation is basically any light source, or a light source that interacts with chromophores located in cells, resulting in photophysical and photochemical change that leads to alterations at the molecular, cellular, and tissue levels of the body. Let me break this down. Chromophores, we'll go over that later. That's a very important definition. And basically, it means anything that can absorb light. Big word, all it means is anything that can absorb light. So we have chromophores in our body. Plants have chromophores. Believe it or not, the chairs in front of you have chromophores. We'll go over that, what that means later. But the more key thing I want you guys to walk away with after the slide is that light elicits some chemical or physical change in the body. That's a physical or chemical change in the body. And that leads to alterations in molecular, cellular, and tissue change, like basically tissue changes, right? You are made of tissue. Your molecular makeup might change, your molecular activity might change at the cellular level, and that might result in higher up things like your tissue change, which is what we see at clinics with those red lasers, or the red lights. Anyway, so photobiomodulation was pioneered by this Hungarian doctor named Dr. Andrei Mester in 1967. And Mester, like not everything, but a lot of things in science, stumbled across something by accident. So what he was trying to do, he was trying to replicate one of his colleagues' work in Boston. And one of his colleagues in Boston was basically using high-powered laser light. So not this one, I can put this on my skin and it's fine. But high-powered laser light. By the way, I just realized I can use this quicker to change the slides. Anyway, high-powered laser, sorry to break your concentration. I have to figure this out. High-powered laser light to basically break down cancer cells. And still we use this technique to break down cancer cells very rarely. So what he was trying to do is replicate his colleague's experiment with laser. And back then they had ruby lasers. They weren't that great, and there was no standard protocol on how to assemble them. And being in Hungary, I'm sure he had poor funding and all that. So he developed this laser. Guess what? It wasn't a great laser. It wasn't good at killing cancer cells, but he did discover that if he showed it, if he exposed some mice, he shaved their backs and showed like this light, this low-level light on their backs, their hair growth would be faster than the mice that didn't have that exposure to the low-level light, the low-level laser light, which is termed LLLT, low-level light therapy. So basically, his bad laser led to this happenstance discovery of some kind of cellular action from light. Very interesting. And so him and his sons actually later in life, they kept pursuing that and kind of illuminating this field. And so what it led to is typical clinical therapies that are good at taking away pain in arthritis. So they use these triple LT, so low-level light therapy lasers in the clinic to take away pain for arthritis, neck and back pain. And also they use it quite extensively in dental surgery. So if an implant is not really taking, your biology is not really taking an implant from that they put inside your gums very well, they'll expose it, they'll give it some kind of regimen of red light therapy. and it'll actually tell the gums, the tissue, to grow around the implant. Very cool. And also wound healing. If you, God forbid, you do this at home, but you cut a mouse and you shine some low-level laser therapy on that wound that you made on the mouse, it'll help heal faster. Also, you can do it yourself. Anyway, so this is used. This is used nowadays, is what I'm trying to say. But it's important, though, that we stress low-level light, right? Otherwise, these are cancer cells, by the way. Otherwise, it could lead to cancer. So even though this has been traditionally used as some kind of anti-cancer therapy in the past, it can also mutate cells and cause some kind of disruption. So it's very important that we optimize our lasers. So, as I said, too much energy can hurt our cells, and there's a threshold. And we know this threshold, and it has to be around this kind of energy density. You don't have to worry about the units or anything like that. But just know the gist that a lot of the things on the market these days, whether they're on Alibaba or more expensive sites, they take advantage of this narrow band of energy to activate your cells, to signal them to do something. That's important. And so we've actually transcended from typical lasers, right? So I think it was the 60s or 70s, NASA wanted to basically work with plants in space. So instead of bringing these sensitive, really hard to use lasers up to space, they developed the LED. That's where we get the LED from. And LEDs have a benefit, and they actually do the same thing that lasers do, but just in a better way, in my opinion. So lasers are coherent beams of light. Look at this. All the light's going in that point, right? Or this point. It's not going in the entire projector, right? Whereas incoherent beams, which is what an LED is, spreads that light along a wider area. And so you negate a lot of the downsides of laser. So with laser, if I shine this long enough, especially the clinical ones, shine it long enough, I'm sure you guys have done this probably if you have experience, long enough on my tissue, it'll cause it to heat up, right? That's not good. What's the feedback from? Feedback. So it'll cause it to heat up, and we don't want that to happen. We actually want the tissue to stay kind of cool, so it can do its own molecular mechanisms without actually. There, is that better? That's better. So we want it to basically, we want our tissues to be signaled to do something rather than heated to do something. So the light is doing something, not the heat. Make sense? So now we'll get to the crux of it. This is the fun biology part. I'm sure you guys are all ready for this. Why is light therapeutic? Any ideas?
Is it because how our eyes retain it?
Very good. Very good. No. So actually our eyes they sense light, and that's what gives us our sleep-wake cycle and all that. But as I said, chromophores all over our body, not just in our eyes, that sense light. And that's what it's about. So any other ideas? It does have energy. And that energy is absorbed by chromophores, which we talked about, and that does something. So remember I mentioned earlier the visible spectrum, right? So if you find one of these LEDs for photobiomodulation, you'll find that, yes, it is red, just like at the beginning of the slideshow, I showed you the panel. You'll see it at the end. That visible light is 600 to 670 nanometers, basically wide, or the wavelength. And then there's not so visible, invisible wavelength that is from on panels as well. It's 800 to 880. And this should give us a clue, basically. Out of the 3,000 publications on photobiomodulation, they're all finding that it has to do with this. And so that should give us a clue as to what is absorbing the light. If we can figure out what kind of biological thing is in us that is absorbing this specific type of frequency of light, then we should know the mechanism, right? Turns out, we kind of do. First, chromophores. As I said, chromophores is simply something that absorbs light. It can be biological, it can be chemical. And in this case, biological. Yes, yeah, it's a protein. And it's in mitochondria. So everyone knows what mitochondria is. Mitochondria, single mitochondria is plural. Everyone knows what mitochondria is, right? What is it? powerhouse of the cell, right? It's responsible for giving us energy. And actually, you cannot live a single second without your mitochondria. So it's very, very important. And actually, the mitochondria houses something called this is where we get complicated. Cytochrome C. Okay, so I want you to ignore everything except this Roman numeral 4 right here. This Roman numeral 4 is called it's a protein, and it's in the mitochondria. You see, here's our mitochondria, and it's blown up. And on this inner membrane right here is something called cytochrome C oxidase. And that is our chromophore. That is what is absorbing all the light from red light therapy, right? And the reason it's doing that is because right nestled in the center of that protein is a copper atom. Copper is really good at absorbing that frequency. And what happens when you absorb that frequency of light is a bunch of things. So bear with me now. We're going to go through the electron transport chain of our mitochondria with a very simple analogy. Dams. I know we have a lot of them in Kuwait. We don't have dams in Kuwait, but the general principle of a dam is basically you have a high potential of water behind this barrier. There's a lot of water behind that barrier. As the water falls, it goes through the turbines and makes electricity, right? So bear with me. Pretend you are cytochrome C oxidase. Pretend you're a protein. And your whole job is pumping up water to the top. That's what cytochrome C oxidase does, not with water, but with protons. So that's all it does. And all of you are pumping and pumping this water up to the top of the dam. You get tired, right? Especially as you age. But if I expose you all to red light, all you cytochrome C oxidase proteins, all of a sudden you start working. So that is the crux of it. You start pumping more water. And so what ends up happening is that the dam produces more energy. The mitochondria produces more energy. So here it is. So it goes this way. Here's the top of the dam where all the protons are, or the hydrogen molecules are. That's where the top of your dam. And this is the bottom. As they fall through this protein called ATP synthase, you get ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. Everyone's heard of the ATP, right? Yeah. So in the case of the cell, more money, fewer problems. Not more money, more problems. More money, fewer problems. So let's say I give you guys $1 million, all of you, not that rich, I wish I was. I give you guys all $1 million in your pocket right now. And I said, you can only spend this on your house. Sure, yeah, and stuff, but like also house. You would fix your house, right? You would go home. I would make a studio, I would make all sorts of stuff. Same principle with the cell. If you give it more ATP, more energy currency, it's going to spend it very wisely on the maintenance and upkeep of itself. Makes sense, right? So that's really all that red light does. Not all, there's a lot more, but really all that you need to know for the purposes of the presentation. So red light and near infrared light, so 600 to 670 nanometers and 800 to 880 nanometers, enhance energy production of the cell. That is the crux of the biscuit, as they say. Where they don't say that in Kuwait, they say that where I'm from in the south. So, but there are other mechanisms at play, right? There's a lot of genes that are turning on and all sorts of, there's hundreds of things, and still we're still characterizing a lot of these things that are happening. And to this day, it's not like we understand everything. So what are researchers finding? Now that you can stimulate cells all across the body, not just your skin cells or whatever, now that you can stimulate cells and tell them to produce more energy, what happens? What happens? Well, take mice and we expose them to this red light therapy in protocols, specific protocols of red light therapy. We find that you can help them with traumatic brain injury. They have better memory after getting hit in the head. We find that their autoimmune disorders kind of go away because it stimulates not just skin cells and stuff, but also immune cells if it gets to it. Better wound healing, better muscle exercise, or better recovery after muscle exercise. Fewer inflammation or inflammatory pain, fewer little abdominal fat, lung inflammation, arthritis, basically a lot of things. Immediately there should be alarm bells going off in your head because there's a lot of things. It's just light. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, a lot of the research that's coming out is very efficacious, very nice. And so abdominal fat, that's very interesting because actually there was a study on people that basically put red lights around their abdomen region. And what happened immediately after was that their blood sugar decreased. And over the next couple of months where they were treating themselves with this red light on their stomach, very medical device, not just red light, their dependence on insulin went down. Interesting, right? Something to look into. So what about humans? What about humans? These are animal models and stuff. What about humans? So for those curious, this little headpiece that they use in research, it's called the Vielite, V-I-E, Vielite. This is in no way an endorsement or advertisement, but this is what they use in research. And this is a funny looking device that basically shoots the red light or shines the red light into the brain. And also there's a nose piece that gets to the brain as well. So these are all different methods to get to the brain. Right here to the skull. This is really traumatic. They basically put a needle through your skull. It's very extreme. Don't do that. This is through your mouth. This is through your nose. So one organ that researchers frequently target with red light therapy is the brain. Why? Well, so undergraduates, the best test subjects. Anyway, so one of the really cool findings from this kind of research on humans is it was done on undergraduates, and they were all healthy. They didn't have any kind of disease or whatever. They were all healthy. So what is the baseline of health, human health? Young people, undergrads, they're all motivated and joyful and all that stuff. What is the best you can do with those kinds of test subjects using red light therapy? Turns out you can improve their mood. So this chart shows before treatment, after treatment. The black triangles show the people that were treated with red light, so it's 20 people. And they give them all sorts of standardized tests to gauge their mood. It's kind of hard to gauge mood, but we have some good tests to gauge it. So after the red light therapy treatment, their mood's kind of elevated or sustained. But the people that didn't get red light kind of stayed the same. And this is a very strong study, make no mistake. Even though we're talking about mood, which is a very nebulous concept and all that, it is still a very powerful study. Another thing that is independent of just a little questionnaire I give you about how you're feeling is a reaction time test. If I give you a reaction time test and I gave you some red light for it, your reaction time actually decreases, funny enough. So why is that? That is so strange. How come people's reaction time would decrease after just stimulating their brains with red light? Interesting, right? Turns out, the author said, by augmenting the neural metabolism of the relevant frontal regions, the function of this sustained attention network is improved, leading to better performance. So the undergraduates were basically, their brain cells were functioning. Their authors were postulating that the red light was improving their energetic storage, their energetic balance, and thus, if your brain has more energy to utilize, obviously there's a lot of circuits that can be used in the brain, such as sustaining your attention on a reaction time test that is really boring and dull, and you're in a white room and stuff. So that's one way. Interesting, right? Tell me that's not interesting. Interesting. So, and they also said this research could ultimately lead to the development of non-invasive, non-pharmacologic, therapeutic, cytoprotective, and performance-enhancing interventions in healthy humans. What does this mean? It means that we don't need to use so traditional pharmacology. You know, if I'm a physician, I'm giving most of my patients one drug, and guess what? We're all not like each other, right? Physiologically, we all handle drugs differently, and so in some cancer drugs, there's a 50% usefulness or efficacy. Basically, 50% of the population will not respond to that cancer drug. 50% will. Antidepressants, I think, are like 80% or something. 80% will not respond to the antidepressants, and 20% will. Depends on how many types. That's why there's so many types of antidepressants. So it's non-pharmacologic, meaning you can eliminate a lot of the variants in humans because we all respond to red light. It's not invasive. I don't have to cut you open. I don't have to do any kind of surgery. It's therapeutic. It helps people. It's cytoprotective, meaning it protects the cell. It equips the cell with more energy to take care of itself. And it's performance enhancing. So actually, there's been some talk about banning red light therapy from some sports events because it has been shown to basically improve muscular endurance and recovery. show you one study that says it doesn't. But we'll go over it. So, diseases. Now that we covered healthy undergraduates, what about diseases, right? What about not so healthy people? So in Alzheimer's, there's stages to Alzheimer's. We have a staging kind of classification to help researchers kind of gauge where someone is and all that stuff. With Alzheimer's, slowly your brain literally dies. Your brain shrinks, and eventually, you can actually look this up on Google. The brain looks, you can have a healthy brain next to an Alzheimer's brain. A healthy brain is full and fat, and the undulations, they're called sulci, right? Like the folds are touching. Whereas in Alzheimer's, they're not. And there's a lot, it weighs much less. And then in Parkinson's. So this has actually been studied in Parkinson's as well. So Parkinson's is actually the death, the brain death of a certain region of the brain responsible for fine motor control. So because I can write, you guys can all write smoothly. That's because of this very specific population of brain cells that actually Parkinson's die off. And so you see them shake a lot. They can't really, also it affects their speech. And I'll talk more about that later. So there's a really cool paper that came out in Russia. And it was done by a single researcher. And basically what he did was he took 89 people with Alzheimer's, and some of them were as young as 30. The reason that is because some people don't win the genetic lottery when it comes to Alzheimer's. They get early onset Alzheimer's. It's terrifying. And basically he took 89 people, divided the group by half, and he's classified them as having mild cognitive impairment, mild Alzheimer's, moderate Alzheimer's, severe Alzheimer's. And then what he did was really kind of crazy, and only the Russians can do this, I guess. What he did was he put a catheter with a red light up their femoral artery, so that he basically opened their artery up in their legs and strung this catheter inside their arteries all the way to their brains. And actually, that's what you're seeing here. This is the carotid artery right here. And it kind of goes all the way up to the brain, and he put the light all the way up there. Why is that important? Why did he do that? Because he eliminated the skull. He eliminated the ultimate barrier, the skull. And so he shined this red light in these Alzheimer's patients for, I think it was a good part of a couple months. And what happened? This is just an example of what happened. So this is one patient, he's 56 years old. He has moderate Alzheimer's, so he's almost towards severe. He's having trouble with obviously his memory, his word recall, his movement, his independent function. And later it could get down to, he's incontinent, he has trouble basically feeding himself, swallowing, breathing. But this guy gave him the red light therapy. And what happened? This is an image of the brain, that main artery, carotid artery, before and after treatment. What do you guys notice? Are you raising your hand? No? No? Anyone?
More veins.
More veins? More artery? Yeah, it looks like they're more dark, right? And they're kind of expanding all over the brain much better. There's more coverage of the brain than if there wasn't a red light treatment. And actually, that's what he saw. So what happens when you expose the brain to such red light is that red light also stimulates the production of this protein called VEGF. The VEGF just signals the brain, or basically blood vessels, to start forming. And so what happened was that this red light therapy stimulated new blood vessel formation. And not just that, the healing of older blood vessels that used to be there. So it healed the blood vessels. And not just that, it also provided each brain cell with more of an energy capacity. If you know anything about Alzheimer's, I'm sure some of you do in this room, is that it is in a way, an energetic crisis in the brain. It's when the brain cells can't feed themselves or they can't function as well, so they start to die. And we still are piecing together the puzzle as to why this happens. So one thing is clear is that this guy in Russia saw up to 7-year sustaining of the therapy, basically. So after 7 years, they still sustained their same level of Alzheimer's or improved it. They didn't do great, which is typical of Alzheimer's. So after this, 80% of the patients that were treated had some kind of tissue recovery as well. Their brains got bigger in specific regions too, where the red light was shown. And that's very important because if the brain gets bigger, Also, it translates to functional things where the brain is actually working. So these people had better memory, they were more independent, they could recall things from their childhood much better, better functional outcomes, basically. Interesting, right? Cool. What about less serious applications of photobiomodulation, PDM? Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, clinics, wrinkles, right? I'm sure everyone knows about that. And actually, there was a study done where they took elderly women who actually have thinner collagen than men, unfortunately, especially later in life. I think they just have less collagen thickness. So a lot of the collagen supplements, I'm not sure if you guys are taking them, they actually don't work. They don't work because the collagen is just broken down into its constituent parts, and then it's taken in by the body. It doesn't signal the skin to produce collagen. So you actually have to signal the skin to produce collagen. So there, I just saved you $30 of TED on your collagen supplements. So what they did after a month of treatment, so this is T0, so times 0, times 3, in yellow and green is the collagen. So basically, this is a cross-section. It's called an ultrasonography of the skin of their face. And it basically showed that after 30 days, you can increase the collagen content in their skin. So, is anyone curious to see what that looks like? So this is before the top of one patient. Wrinkles here, wrinkles there, and this is after. Same exposure, same camera settings and everything, same lighting conditions. Does anyone see a difference? Big difference, right? How amazing. Photobiomodulation. So, in the interest of time, I know I've discussed Alzheimer's, I've discussed healthy undergraduates that have some kind of good improvement and all that. I will just summarize some of the main ones, and I'll stop on each one and I'll explain a little bit. So, brain diseases, as I mentioned before, Alzheimer's, but also I didn't mention Parkinson's. So actually, there was this year a study that was released on Parkinson's. And people with Parkinson's, they generally cannot recover. It's just like Alzheimer's, you're slowing their degradation. And so with red light therapy, you could actually improve their function. So one of the tests is called a writing test, where they basically measure the area where you write your name or something. And people with Parkinson's, because they're shaking so much, the area with which they write their name is so big. After the photobiomodulation treatment, they have a smaller area. They can control their hands better. What does that say? It says that it's stimulating the recovery of the cells in the brain that basically are in control of fine motor coordination, fine motor control. Crazy, right? No drug on the market does this. So wrinkles, we also talked about that. Bone and tendon recovery. So one thing I didn't mention was that red light doesn't just stimulate mitochondria. There's actually a new class of receptors on each of your cells, especially your immune cells, that is sensitive to light. So they open and close in response to light. Strange, right? So one of them is bone and tendon cells, those types of cells. And signaling them with light will actually tell them to restructure themselves around new wounds. So you can actually improve bone recovery and tendon recovery. What these researchers did was they cut the Achilles tendon of mice, which is very cruel, and then they basically stimulated the production or the healing of that Achilles tendon with red light. And guess what? The mice were injured for far less time than the other mice that didn't receive the red light. Another thing, hair growth. It's going to be very handy for me because I know I'm going to lose my hair. It's in my genetics. Hair growth. Actually, they sell caps online now for hair growth, and they're covered with red lights. You just need to be really careful about which ones you buy. So same thing. You're telling the cells to basically produce more energy, and thereby also they can sustain their keratin production and their hair production. Basically. Makes sense, right? It also improves blood flow to the, as I said, it stimulates this protein, which stimulates blood flow. It's also really good for that. Another thing is inflammation and immune function. So a lot of those devices in the beginning that I showed you that are handheld and not LEDs, they will actually be used for arthritis. Remember, I talked about that? Arthritis is the inflammation of the joints and inflammation of the joints. So basically, you're telling the immune cells to basically correct themselves. For some reason, red light it makes it so if there's an autoimmune disease, I'm not saying all diseases, but in the case of arthritis, it'll tell the immune cells to stop attacking your joints. Cool, right? So last thing, and this is actually the most serious. You would think that Alzheimer's is the most serious, but actually depression is. Why? Because depression affects, according to the WHO, affects around 850 million people in the world. It's almost the 7th of the world, and it's the #1 cause of disability in the entire world. Developed and undeveloped countries, so-called undeveloped countries, to be politically correct, alike. So the reason that depression is, I would say, the #1 thing to be concerned about is because if you're depressed, you are probably not very happy with holding down a job, and not to frame things in the capitalist like, oh, you're not going to be productive and produce money or produce things for us, but also you're not going to be taking care of your family very well, and it's just a downward spiral for everyone. Depression doesn't just affect one person; it's a fabric, right? It's society fabric. Anyway, so actually, a lot of the depression studies did the same protocol that they had with the undergraduates, right? Where they put this device right. I didn't mention the brain area, but they put it right here in the front part of the brain. And see, with the undergraduates, why did they have better mood? Why did they have that? It turns out that part of the brain is that's actually really responsible for regulating whatever raw emotions come from your subconscious. It's basically the CEO of the brain. And as you get tired throughout the day, this is one of the most expensive parts of the brain to run. And as you get tired throughout the day, the activity kind of decreases. That's why people get moody towards the end of the day. So with depression, it's a dysregulation of that circuit right here, and regulating your mood, kind of watching your thoughts and making sure, should I feel sad about this? Should I do or not? Basically. So photobiomodulation stimulates energy production of that part of the brain, thereby helping depression symptoms. Crazy, right? So, but as I said, I think at the beginning, I don't want you guys to think this is some panacea. This is not some cure-all. A lot of the research might be as robust as that Russian Alzheimer's one. Some might not be. This is an example of one that's not. So what these researchers did was they took athletes and trained them on their 5-kilometer run. They separated them into groups. People treated with photobiomodulation. They're basically stimulating all the muscles and the joints of their bodies. What did they find? Not much of a difference. So it really depends. And actually, one thing in science is that negative results are actually better results than positive results most of the time, because they tell researchers not to, or to keep trying, or to, basically they tell you more than a positive result. Positive result leaves you with more questions. So, as I said, this is not some panacea, this is not some cure-all, and I don't want you guys to think it is as such. Please do your own research. I'm just communicating to you the main things, the main important things. So, we've been spending a lot of time in the clinical realm. Let's talk about what Silicon Valley people that have a lot of money do for themselves. They throw a bunch of money at these products, and one of them is called the Juve. And here's the Juve. This is actually one of their most expensive products, around $5,000 for this whole thing. And basically what they do is keep it next to their desk and stimulate themselves while they work. But the thing is, the downside to these panels is that it's not directly on the brain. So if you're interested in treating or maybe biohacking yourself in your house, if you're interested in doing that with your brain, then I would recommend the ViLight, VIE light, which is used in research. The Juve is really good for skin, though. It's really good for supposed inflammation. They advertise that actually, and it supposedly enhances workout recovery. But still, I think the research on that is still kind of shoddy, and it remains to be seen. But anyway, so you can get these. The low price of $5,000. Anyway, thank you guys. I hope it was informative. We'll open now for questions. And I think the questions are on the computer. Are they?
All right, so I will ask you the questions. If anyone has any question, please add them. Or if you want us to give you the microphone, then you can ask directly. Okay, I'll start with the ones on the app. First one, since the light accelerated hair growth, how did we evolve it to remove hair? Is this in fact similar to laser hair removal tools?
Yeah, so the difference is power. So with laser hair removal tools, you remember I showed you that curve, this curve, right? With this curve, it basically says that the higher you go in power, the worse it often is for your tissues. And that's what laser hair removal is. It's killing or making smaller, it's actually killing the cells of that hair follicle. And over time, actually, you find that you don't need to do any more hair removal treatments, right? That's the goal of laser. So yeah, it's just about energy.
Okay, so and since it helped people with Alzheimer's, remember, do you think or know of red light helping PTSD patients overcome memory blockages?
That's a good question. I'm sure there's a publication out there. A quick Google search, I could probably find an answer, but I'm not sure. I think so. I know PTSD has something to do with the over signaling of this part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is basically your lizard brain. It kind of tells you there's a threat, there's a snake in the room, there's a cockroach in the room, or something like that. So, yeah, I'm not sure, but it's a good question.
Is it available in Kuwait?
So I've looked online for myself, and no, it's not. And I think it is available in Kuwait. Actually, it's not available in Kuwait. You have to actually order online. And so I'll mention more about the power to look for later, because towards the end. But yeah, it's not available in Kuwait. You have to order it.
And how is red light therapy different from just being exposed to the sun?
Yes, that's a good question. Okay, so the sun has actually, obviously, it has a lot more than just red light, right? It has yellow, blue, green, and also ultraviolet, other frequencies or other wavelengths of light. So the sun, if you look at it, if you take a square centimeter, so if everyone can just do this with a finger, make a little square centimeter like that. So that little patch, in that patch, there's 140 milliwatts. I don't know, for me, I can't really conceptualize that amount of power, but there's 140 milliwatts per square centimeter from the sun. If you just take the sun, that's how much. With low-level light therapy or photobiomodulation, the general protocol is only 5 milliwatts per square centimeter. So that's around 28 times less power than the sun, and also it's only in a specific frequency, a specific wavelength of light. And if you go, and the researchers are finding that if you go a little bit above that, like 20 or maybe 60 or 100, you actually start to get deleterious, meaning not very helpful effects, or even lower than that. So that is kind of the sweet spot, 5 milliwatts per centimeter square. So yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, the sun is basically, it won't give you as safe and as effective a treatment on your skin.
Okay. Next, does red light affect your eyesight? Doesn't your eye get tired under red light?
So you would think, so your eye itself actually gets tired quicker under blue light. So I'm sure everyone on their phones, on their laptops and stuff has seen the night light, right? Or these red light filters. And that's because blue light actually tires your eyes, and it signals your brain, blue light, it signals your brain to stop the production of the sleepy hormone, melatonin. And if you put the red light filter on your phone or your thing, or your, what is it? You actually stimulate melatonin production, which is, as I said, the sleepy hormone. They don't have to buy melatonin in the pharmacy and stuff. So basically, red light does make you sleepy. It doesn't make you awake, right? And you can actually, it's safe to keep your eyes open. If you get one of those red light panels and you keep your eyes open right in front, they might be uncomfortable, but it is perfectly safe to keep your eyes open during that. It will not damage your eye. In fact, it might help your eye because it's stimulating your retinas to produce more energy. So it's basically stimulating and healing, I would say. I hate using that, healing, it's such an umbrella thing, but like it's basically healing the retina. So it's fine if you do that. That answers the question, whoever had that.
So does one's skin pigment matter in absorption of red light?
That's a good question. Okay, so no. So you would think that it does, but because red light is not absorbed by the melanin in let's say darker skinned people or the lack of melanin in lighter skinned people or whatever, red light still makes it through the skin regardless of your skin tone or color. So that's good news.
So can we say that red light is, in short, a catalyst to our cellular activity?
So a catalyst, and like a definition of a catalyst, right? It lowers the activation energy for something to happen. I would say it's I would say it's a catalyst. It stimulates cytochrome C, that nice protein in the mitochondria, and basically allows it to do its job much better. So in a way, it is a catalyst. Yes. Whoever had that question, very insightful. Very insightful.
What is the role of sunlight in all of this? Why is red light better than sunlight?
So sunlight, good question. Sunlight has, as we know, UV light, right? And UV and a bunch of others. UV light actually signals your cells to become senescent. It's a big word that just means it tells your cells to shut down their production and basically stop being active. It tells them to be older, it tells them to be more geriatric. And red light actually combats that. So there was a study done on people that were exposed to UV light, and photobiomodulation actually prevented their skin cells from becoming senescent or old. So it actually is protective. So the sun is actually deleterious in a way. It is also good for you, like to have some UV, everything in moderation. But yeah, it actually helps. It's much better than the sun in that respect.
What about other light frequencies? Compared to red light, has there been any study of other lights that's been found to be as beneficial or dangerous?
Yes. Blue light, actually, I was mentioning to some of the guests at the beginning before we started, the blue light cannot really penetrate your skin very easily. If you get a blue laser or a blue light and put it through your skin or your finger, you won't see it shining through the other side. But a red light will, right? I can actually do that with my finger now. And the reason that is because it's a longer wavelength and it's stopped by less things in the way, right? See? But a blue laser, you won't see anything. So what other wavelengths of light? Remember we were talking about 800 to 880 nanometers for the wavelength? Have you ever seen those infrared saunas? There's infrared saunas that you can buy, like 30 kD on YouBuy. And it's basically a bag with a seat. You sit in the bag, and there's far infrared instead of near infrared, and they emit 3,000 nanometer wavelength. And what that does is it heats your core up because it can penetrate very deep into your body. It'll heat your core up, which is basically what a sauna does. It heats your core up, and it'll elicit a lot of the benefits that a sauna, an actual sauna with fire, whatever, will do with just infrared light. Cool, right? So there are beneficial effects to far infrared light as well. But the thing with far infrared light is that it's not necessarily absorbed by the chromophores that we talked about in mitochondria. It's only really stimulating your cells like a microwave would, but not as bad as a microwave was. Make sense? Cool. And gamma and all the stuff to the left, the blue light spectrum, is actually deleterious, and it's ionizing. It's considered ionizing. It means it'll strip your electrons off different molecules in your body, and that's not good. So the things under the near infrared, or the things under the blue light, are non-ionizing. So from the visible spectrum all the way to the left or to the right of the diagram, actually, I can take you back, are considered non-ionizing. And you must be asking yourself, what about the microwave? Isn't that to the right of the band? If you're saying that it's not ionizing, it is technically not ionizing, but our microwaves actually use very high power, right? So it's about the power density, and so that's what heats up your body, your tissue. Let's say you stick a piece of steak in the microwave. It's actually the power density. It's not ionizing the steak. Makes sense?
Can you have too much red light?
Yes. So something I didn't mention in the mechanism of red light is that when that happens, when you produce more ATP, you're also producing something called, I'm sure everyone knows these, they're called reactive oxygen species. Has anyone heard of them? It's why you take antioxidants, is because, oh yeah, I ate my vegetables today, I had my blueberry smoothie today, or my acai bowl, and it's an antioxidant, it's reducing the oxidants that are produced from just existing. That's why we age. Just by existing, your mitochondria are producing these nasty, quote unquote, molecules that will bind, they're very strong binders of electrons, and they'll steal electrons off different parts of your body. And that's what leads to aging over time, is that we get less good at handling those reactive oxygen species. And when I say reactive oxygen species, it could just be a single oxygen molecule that has a free electron, and that's very reactive, and it's just jumping around in your body. And then it could be a hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is very nasty for the body, but yet we have it all over our body. So, but the thing is, there's something good about a tiny amount of reactive oxygen species. So remember I said reactive oxygen species are bad. In a high amount, they are bad. In a low amount, they're actually very good because they stimulate mechanisms in our genes to protect against reactive oxygen species. So they'll actually start producing enzymes to handle these oxidation species. And therein lies one of the benefits of red light, is that after 20 minutes of exposure to red light, you'll have more than enough reactive oxygen species produced from red light, from the mitochondria working. And that is enough to elicit a response. Past the 20 minutes, you'll actually start to produce a lot more reactive oxygen species and produce deleterious effects. You'll start to produce too many reactive oxygen species, and then it might be worse. What the opposite of beneficial might be disadvantageous, right? Not beneficial. Make sense? Cool.
So, what are the side effects? There is a lot more than proteins in a cell. So let's say a patient has cancer. If he's in red light, would that make his cancer more aggressive or more active?
It will. So cancer cells are just like your regular cells, right? They operate on the same machinery. So you have to be, it's a very good question. Whoever asked that, very good question. So there was a study done on oral cancers. And basically, if you put red light in someone's mouth with oral cancer, it'll accelerate the growth of the cancer, because the cancer has a lot more energy. It'll be more competent at dividing. It'll be more competent at growing. Very insightful question. Whoever asked that.
How long ago was the study regarding the red light and Alzheimer's? Also, how come there hasn't been more funding and research for something with 80% effectiveness?
Good. So therein, I put a star on that slide. Therein lies some of this is where we put our thinking hats on. Number one, there's one researcher in that paper. There's not a group of researchers, right? So that immediately to me is suspicious, because it never just takes one researcher to make a paper. And number two, it was done in a place where, let's just say, the regulatory bodies are not as good as in Europe or in the States, in my opinion. This is my opinion, as I said, Professor. So that's a good point. There are current trials in the States studying Alzheimer's to see if it is legitimately that effective. So they're still underway, and that's why we have to wait to kind of see if it is actually 80% beneficial, right? Or beneficial to 80% of the population. My guess, if I had to guess this, if I had to make an educated guess, I would think that it does have a benefit, but it might not be as dramatic. And I think that's the safest thing to assume, given the data. So I wasn't trying to mislead you guys. I'm just trying to show you, like, this is what's going on in science, and this is what someone published, and somehow it passed peer review. So a lot of scientists looked at it, and it's out there. And people are actually, it's one of the papers with the highest citation. So people are actually using that paper in the West and Europe and all over, citing that paper. So I was basically going out on a limb and saying, maybe this paper is valid. Let me show you what their results are saying. Good insight.
So what's stopping red light therapy from becoming a primary form of treatment?
It actually is for some things like arthritis, just like I mentioned at the beginning. What's stopping it from reaching a lot of other things? I would say incentives. I think it's slowly gaining traction. I think in the beginning of the 2000s, that's when research skyrocketed. But to be honest, I can't really answer that question. I don't know. I don't know why it hasn't gained much traction. Probably because of the mixed efficacy, the mixed effectiveness. So with hair loss, there's actually the biggest debate, less among Alzheimer's and Parkinson's actually. For some reason, Parkinson's, there was a paper published in Nature about it. So Nature is like one of the big three science papers. It's like the Harvard of science papers. So there's less argument about that, and there's more argument about whether or not it aids hair growth for some reason. So basically, it's something to keep our eyes and ears open to. Make sense?
Does the shade of the red light matter, or it's all the same as long as it is?
As long as it's so in that specific band of wavelengths of red light, you will only get a single shade. You won't get any other shades. Any other shades of red light, it could just be a mixture of different colors or something like that. But as long as you have that band, then you shouldn't be seeing any kind of shade. Does that make sense? Unless it's mixed with other light. Yeah.
Question: how would you know that you're on the right band?
The right band.
Yes,
so
like you bought something and it produces red light.
Yeah.
How would you tell if this is a correct band?
There's spectrometers, I think, that you can buy. Some are expensive, some are cheap, but basically they'll tell you the wavelength that it's absorbing. But it's very difficult and expensive to do that because guess what? It's like all around us. You have to be in a very dark room and just be exposing yourself or your machine, your testing device to that source. And the other thing that I would recommend is, this is why they're so expensive, is using a reputable source, right? The Joovv light, the JOOVV light, which I advertised at the end, I'm not getting paid for it, right? They are actually considered a class 2 medical device in the States. And that is extremely, not difficult, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops to be considered a class 2. Class 1 can be considered like a lot of the red hats that you see. It's approved class 1 by the FDA, that you'll see those red light hats. But a class 2 is actually where it's going to be used in research. That's a big deal. If it's used in research and it's used to study serious diseases that could basically lead to some kind of therapy in the future, it's very important that they have class 2. So that's why I would recommend, even despite the price, I recommend the Joovv because of that. Because their quality standards are good, and you'll ensure that you are getting the right wavelength of light. And class 3, by the way, is just any device that's basically implanted in someone. So it's not like you're going to have red light. It's basically the highest they could build. Like they're not going to implant red light devices inside it. And it's very difficult to get class 3. It's not FDA, by the way, Food and Drug Administration.
Last question from the public. Can you please talk a little bit about the reaction being decreased after the undergraduates got exposed to the red light? I think the reaction was increased, the reaction time.
So the reaction time
reaction
decreased. Yeah. And that was because what the researchers were saying, they postulated.
Can you please explain reaction time first?
Reaction. Okay, so basically they have these kids and they sit in front of this light that's off. As soon as they see a light or a signal, they press a button really fast. And that was the test. And the faster you press it, the researchers are saying that red light helps you press it faster and recognize the signal faster. Make sense? Cool. So the people that didn't have the red light had slower reaction times. So they pressed the button much slower, significantly slower, 20 milliseconds to 30 milliseconds, which is significant. That's slower. It's very much faster. Let's go to red light.
Do you have any direct questions?
So basically, we've been taught, at least like for me in my high school, that basically if someone's overexposed to something over time, they sort of develop immunity to it, but they develop ways to not have the same. So they won't get as effective. So for example, if you take Panadol, you won't be headaches won't go away.
Everything in moderation is the Greek thing, right?
Yeah. So the people in Silicon Valley who continuously expose themselves to the Joovv, do they develop sort of the same thing where they?
That's a good insight, and maybe they do. I don't know. I think I would hazard a guess and say that there's an upper limit to the benefit that you can have, and maybe they've maximized their benefit. But I don't think that they'll decrease the efficacy of it, because it is, after all, utilizing not a receptor, not an enzyme in the liver like a drug would, where your body would respond to the amount of drug. It's utilizing a very basic mechanism that has been preserved in our biology for, well, not our biology, but life's biology for billions of years, which is mitochondria. And so I think you can sensitize the effects. Like you'll see a maximum ceiling to the effects, but I don't think you'll see a decreased efficacy over time, which is a good thing, if I had to guess.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatt, for this lecture. I want to ask something that's kind of reverse from what was just asked. So saying that if therapeutically the red light gives you all the so forth benefits, and if I am, or anyone who's, say for example, medication or any form of purification or therapy that you practice, or for example, someone who has a constant, continuous disease versus someone who does not have a similar disease. And take medication, this helps you survive if you have the disease, where someone who doesn't need it, but they still can't take it for extra protection, being too careful. When you lose that, because your body is so used to it,
Like a prophylaxis is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So your body is used to that thing, it might actually be harmful later on. Would something like red light be similar? Like, let's say I take it monthly by monthly, whatever is the good enough time span for it, and then I cut using the red light therapy. Would that be problematic for the future? Would that be?
I don't think so. I think I'm not sure that's the better answer. I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know. But off the record, if I had to hazard a guess, I would think it's a problem. Except if the only problem I can think of with long-term use of the red light is, let's say you have a melanoma on your side that you haven't seen for years or months, and you're stimulating subtly the growth over time of that melanoma, and it gets malignant and all sorts of stuff. So that's probably the only downside to using it. But to answer your question specifically, to be honest, I don't know. It's a very good question.
Because also and thank you for talking about the history. It was my specialty, because this therapy is, or the actual field is relatively new. So I personally wouldn't risk doing a red light therapy because it's too recent.
It is,
in
and
the field of science for such.
it's good to be careful, especially if these therapies are not, like the long term of these therapies. It's a very good insight. The long term of these therapies are not known. As you said, right? It's only been since the late 60s, practically in use since the 90s and 39 years. That's pretty small on the scientific time scale. And we haven't really seen what this does. And that's why it's attracted these kind of trailblazing biohackers. That's why the name of this talk is that it's biohacking for everyone. Because that's what people are doing. The majority of the time, they're not going to the clinic. They're buying these lights and setting it near their desk or shining it on all sorts of body parts and stuff. And they're eliciting some kind of change. Because everyone has access to communication, like internet now, a lot of in the health sphere, like does anyone pay attention to Ben Friedfield or Rhonda Patrick or whatever? All of them are basically experimenters. They're experimenting on themselves, N equals 1, and we still don't know the long term. So this is just what the point I'm trying to make is that this is very cutting edge, and this is very, I wouldn't say it's crazy risky, but everything has risk, right? Breathing has risk. And this is one of those things where you need to acknowledge the risks. You need to go in thinking that this is something to be careful about and watch. Make sense? That's a good point. I think only if the cell that it's stimulating is leading already towards cancer, right? So if it's leading towards cancer, it might give it enough reactive oxygen species, like I said, to mutate the cancer in just the way, or the pre-cancer in just the way to lead the cancer. So it could, and that's why we have to be careful, right? Also, I wanted to say that the red light activates something called NF-κB, NF-κB, and it's basically something that turns on and off genes, and it turns off and on a bunch of genes. And it's involved in inflammation. And typically when you see a a very high amount of this molecule, it means that there's a lot of inflammation. But what's strange is that after photobiomodulation, you see a high amount, but you actually see decreased inflammation. Something that is making researchers scratch their head. They still don't know the mechanism of that. And the reason I'm mentioning this thing that increases inflammation is because a lot of the time in cancer cells, they turn it off, or because inflammation signals the immune system to come and attack it. So a lot of cancer cells turn that off, or they have something that's not working very well. Make sense? Yeah. So could it lead to cancer? Absolutely, everything could lead to cancer, which sucks, but such is life, right? This talk could lead to cancer. I hope not of the brain, I hope or of the ears. So can you get cancer of the ears? We'll find out today. So that's it. Cool. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. How much time are we at? Right on the money almost. Nice. Well, guys, enjoy your day and start lining your pockets for your red light devices. Okay.
Thank you very much for attending, everyone. It was a pleasure to see you face to face. Thank you, Tarek. We enjoyed having you with us tonight.
Thank you. You were a wonderful audience. Good questions. Thank you.
Thank you.